This is a story that I have there's no structure to this story. I don't know where to go with it, so I'm going to ramble for a minute and maybe we can get some pieces and cut it together. Sometime in the early 90s, some friends and I took off to Florida. Let's see, what adventures did we have on the way there? We took an old Firebird, 1973 Firebird. This is the early 90s, so it's already a classic basically. And got it running and took off to Florida. On the way there, the air suspension, which I had in the back, not the jumping kind of air suspension, but air shocks, broke down, and had I not had a bicycle pump in the back car, in my toolbox, we would have been stuck on the side of the road because the car basically fell down onto the wheels. We had a hurricane chase us all the way to Florida. What happened when we caught rain a couple of times, we'd outrun it for a little ways. At one of the rest stops, we actually had to push the car out of the mud because the rainwater had come up so far. By the time we got to Florida, we stopped at a hotel, found a place to crash like the first night, and started looking for jobs. I was getting Social Security at the time, supplemental Social Security income, and the other two people who were with me both ended up finding odd jobs. Amanda, she found a job at a arcade, which was kind of interesting. Never went to the arcade. I walked past it a couple of times because we went to this place called Hollywood, Florida. Don't ever go to Hollywood, Florida. I can't recommend the place at all. At least not from the perspective of somebody who had to live there and try to survive there. The place we ended up renting for about 6 weeks, I think it was, is gone now. It's in a multi-million-dollar house area where all the houses around us were $1 million or so. It was crazy. There's one house that had been renovated into apartments, and it was 8 units. And a teacher lived there, and the guy behind us, I forget what he did, but he was just like a normal Joe like the rest of us. And the three of us crashed from an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment. And it was a rat's nest, or I should say a roach nest. It was terrible. What are you going to do when you have no money? Didn't have a whole lot going on the whole time we were there. It came down to basic survival. We met some nice people. There were some pretty cool people there. One lady from Germany. She worked at the mall where we hung out quite a bit. Just to get out of the heat, basically. I remember the one morning, once all getting up, because we left the windows open, of course, and it was freezing. We had a cold front move through. Those were the basic highlights of our trip. The whole thing, and the reason I went in the first place was to find myself, I guess. I just wanted to get away from home. I hadn't been away up until that point on my own. One thing, Amanda ended up losing a bunch of her stuff because what happened was her mother had sent her a couple of boxes of her stuff, and we were already on our way back to Houston piece by piece. The structure of our environment fell apart, as they say, and we all came back. I came back on a bus. The bus trip was pretty interesting because I had a toolbox, a bag with some clothes in it. I had another bag that had a few things in it, but it also had a bayonet and some ammunition because I had sold a 9mm pistol. I was over 21 at the time. I had sold a 9mm pistol before we ever left to raise money for when we got out there. And when I got on the bus to come back, I knew it was going to be a long journey, and I was just ready to go to sleep. I couldn't take the stress of having to be out there all on my own, kind of thing. It was just me coming back at this point. We were getting on the bus and sitting down, having my stuff next to me, and I had checked 2 bags because you could check 2 at the time. I checked the toolbox because it could lock, and the bag that had all my clothes and stuff in it, and I still had basically my jacket and the bag that had the bayonet and ammunition in it, along with a bunch of other stuff. And the cops come on the bus and ask, they walk straight up to me and ask me, so do you have any stuff in the overhead compartment? I'm like, no, I just have this and this. And by the time I said I had this and this, by the time I turned my head back to tell him I had some stuff and checked in, he was already moving on to someone else. And I didn't think anything of it really at the time. I'd completely forgotten what was in that bag and the significance of carrying. This is in the early 90s, so it's a good 8 years before 9/11 or any of this, so 8-10 years. And so I'm not sure what kind of trouble you get in for something like that. On the trip back home, I did end up stopping for I think a 4-hour layover at one of the places, one of the bus stations, and these guys had guitar cases along with their luggage, and they were sitting there waiting to get on a different bus, and I was talking to them, blah blah blah, and I got the distinct impression at one point that there weren't any guitars in those cases. So, you know, the bus trips used to be a little more unique, I guess, than they are now, a little more realistic than things are now, because I know they have the metal detectors running at bus stations now. It's funny how much freedom people had just a few years ago. In my lifetime, things have changed so much, and I wonder every day whether those changes have helped us or hurt us. All I see are my freedoms disappearing, vanishing from one day to the next, because back then you could transfer money from one state to another and you wouldn't get a problem with it. Now you're starting to get all these people looking at you. Why are you transferring money? You couldn't live on cash. You could live on cash back then. You can't now, because there are laws in some places that you can't take rent money in cash anymore. You can't buy a car in some states on cash anymore because they want their fees. Just recently, I forget what it was, but you can't have a garage sale. You can't have a garage sale and use cash. You have to have some other means of transferring the money. And it's also that they say it's also they can charge taxes on it, which is bad enough, but really it's just to track where all the money's going. Yet, how many billions of dollars leave our country every day in reparations to other countries? And people saying, well, I got to send money back home to the family, and we're not taxing any of that. Only citizens seem to be the ones losing their rights these days. So, I guess it's one way to make sure that illegal aliens get all the rights is to take it away from the citizens. So, anyway, there's a half story, half opinion. This will have to be Vlogtober day. I think we're in 22 now.